Peter's vision, which we will look at in a bit, and about how Jewish tradition, but I want to look about how Jewish tradition, or basically their thinking, viewed Gentiles. You see, Gentiles were considered to be unclean people. The Jews were the chosen. So if you were chosen, then a Gentile was beneath you because they were not chosen. They were unclean, and hence Jews were forbidden to even touch them, let alone enter their house or eat with them. And as it states later in this chapter, Peter did both. When a Jew would pass a Gentile on the street, they would take their cloak and they would hold it close with their arms crossed in front of them so that they wouldn't accidentally touch them. Because if they did, they would have to go through this ceremonial cleansing ritual. I once heard Pastor Skip Hasek say that he read that Jews thought that God created Gentiles only to keep the fires of hell burning hot. That's how much Jews disliked Gentiles. They considered them unworthy of God, so that they were unworthy of being saved. For a Gentile to become a believer was a concept that Jews had a hard time with. They thought for them to be a believer, to be able to receive salvation, they would have to go through this ritual of conversion to Judaism. But the thing is, God saw things differently. His plan was the same for the Jewish community as it was for the Gentile community. God wanted both of them, both Jew and Gentile alike, to come to him in faith. So now let's get back to Peter's vision. Now he's in Joppa and he's staying with Simon, who was a tanner. This in itself would upset a Jewish community. You see, Peter was staying at a house of a man who Jews forbidden to associate with because he worked with dead animals. If you can remember, they were forbidden to touch anything dead. And if they would do so, they had to go through yet another ritual of cleansing. And we all know what a tanner does. They work with dead animals. But nevertheless, this is where Peter was staying with his friend Simon. So Peter was already a bit taboo. Now Peter, knowing the importance about prayer and following Jesus' example, he seeked a place where he could be alone with God to pray. So up onto the rooftop he goes. You see, in Jesus' time, rooftops were flat, and they were a highly significant place because they served many purposes, such as a place to sleep. Lots of people slept on the rooftops because it was a cool place. They were served as a place to dry their crops, or a place for storage, or socializing, or even a place of worship. So this made Simon's rooftop the perfect place for Peter to go to be alone with God and pray. And of course, we all know prayer is an important part of our daily walk with Christ. However, I think that sometimes we get a bit distracted by life and by things, and sometimes we forget how important it is for us to take that time to be alone with God and pray. We might not always put prayer as our priority like we should. I'm not saying that we don't pray. I'm saying that we need to make it a more prominent place in our lives. Because how else are we going to get to know God better? How else are we going to be able to hear his words for us if we don't talk to him? Somewhere where there's no phone, no television, and no spouse or children to interrupt us. When was the last time you really, truly poured your heart out to God and just sat and prayed and listened Remember, God's voice is not always an audible voice. Maybe it's something that's speaking to you from inside. Maybe it's the wind blowing, a bird chirping. The truth is, we need God's grace and wisdom as we journey through our lives. So we need to spend that quiet one-on-one time with God in prayer. We need to follow this example that Jesus set and that Peter was doing, so that we can connect fully with our Father in heaven. And that's what Peter's doing on the rooftop. He went up to a place without distraction to pray. But although this was a place where he could be isolated from the world below, his body still got distraction because it was around lunch. And I'm sure that they were cooking something down in the house that the odor came up, and maybe his belly began to grumble a little bit because Peter became hungry. Now we have Peter trying to pray while his belly's thinking about dinner. He goes into this trance, and while he's in a trance, God uses Peter's distraction of hunger to teach him about the Gentiles. God shows him the heavens opening up. Whenever you hear about the heavens opening up, you know something big is coming. And it did. A large sheet begins to be let down by the four corners. Let's pause here a moment. We need to look at the meaning, the hidden meaning in this description. First, we see the heavens open up. This is God's subtle way of telling us a truth, of a mystery that's been hidden. Also, we see the significant meaning behind this sheet being let down by its four corners. The four corners of the sheet speaks of this world. So this meaning that's being hidden is for the whole world. It tells us that God's message to Peter involves everyone. And on this sheet is a variety of animals. There were four-footed animals, there were reptiles,